Okay, for the Maryland 250 Labor History Project, I'm Bill Berry back again, and we have a great guest today, Tim Wheeler. And Tim is the author of a book, No Power Greater, which is the life and times of George Meyers, who was a longtime union organizer in Maryland, lived in Baltimore. Tim used to live in Baltimore City, now lives out in the state of Washington, but it's great to have you. So, Tim,
Thank you.
tell us a little bit about George Meyer's history, and then we'll
Well,
get into how you wrote the book. Because I think, go
thank
ahead.
you, Bill. I very much appreciate this opportunity to talk about my book. Um, I knew George very well. He was a dear friend, a neighbor. My wife and I and our three children actually lived in George's house when he and his wife Allie moved up to New York. George had been chosen as the labor secretary of the Communist Party USA, and he moved up to New York for his duties. And then a
About
few
what
years
what
later,
year was that, Tim?
that would have been 1969 because Joyce and I moved to Baltimore from Washington, D.C. In on July 4th of 1969. I remember it vividly. We watched the fireworks from the end of Beaumont Avenue looking down towards the stadium there, Memorial Stadium, and saw the fireworks going off. And so we moved into his house, a nice big 5 bedroom house on Beaumont Avenue. George and Allie had been living there for a number of years. Um, and so then he moved back, and we then had to move out of his house. And we found another house about 2 blocks away on the same avenues on Beaumont Avenue in Lower Govens neighborhood of Baltimore. And George was an active member of the Communist Party. He was a member of the club that my wife Joyce belonged to. I was not a member of that same club in Baltimore, but we saw each other all the time. And I was at that time the um, uh, Washington correspondent for the Daily World, the Communist Party's newspaper. And George was always coming into Washington. He would always come first to my office in the National Press Building, and we would plan what we were going to do. He'd say, "Tim, I want to go see all these union people." We would go, to the steel workers headquarters, the Teamsters headquarters, the IBEW, you name it. We were going to these union offices, and George would go in and have an appointment. He would sit down with whoever it was, a legislative representative. Sometimes it was high-ranking leaders. Uh, One of the people that he became close friends was William Wimpesinger, um, Wimpy, we called him. And George went to see him, and he went to the machinist, the Union Hall, there right on Connecticut Avenue, and was greeted by just the receptionist, and the receptionist said, "Oh well, Mr. Wimpelsinger is here. Would you like to speak
Yeah.
with him?" They became bosom buddies.
Okay. Well, let's go back to George's beginnings out in Western
Okay,
Maryland. He
sure.
was from a mine worker
Yeah,
family.
George was born in Lonaconing, Maryland. He was the son of a coal miner in the Georges Creek Valley. And his mother was a fighting Irish woman. And George always said that he got his his fighting uh, rebel politics from his mother, and so that's where he grew up. He grew up in Lonaconing, steeped in the history and the struggles of the coal miners in that region. His father, George Augustus Meyers, was a steward in his representative union rep in the coal mines where he worked. That whole valley was dominated by John D. Rockefeller because the Consolidation Coal Company got its start in that very valley. And so there were strikes, long strikes, bitter strikes. They were suffering from they were paid a wage differential that was like, let's see, it was the miners up in Pennsylvania were getting 60 cents a ton for mining coal. And in the Georges Creek Valley, they were paid 45 cents a ton, and a long ton at that, 2,240 pounds. So they fought against this wage differential, a bitter strike battle. So George got to know the what is it? Mother Jones. Mother Jones came in to lead the miners and convince them to keep fighting. So that's how George grew up, and he talked about it all the time. We would go out there. George and I would drive out. I would ride with him to meet with his sisters, wonderful sisters, and his brother, who lived in Lonaconing still. So that's where he grew up, and he became. His dad said, "Well, I hope you don't become a coal miner because it's one hell of a hard life." And his own father died of black lung. So that's what George grew up seeing. So George, they had a fund for George to go to college, but he was unable to do that because they went into a depression, and they had to use some money to live on. So George got a job finally. It was in my book, the struggle to get a job, and he finally got a job at in at the what's the name of that?
Celanese?
Celanese, yes, yes. And he he I describe, and then George told me about this. The first day, he and young guys, they show up at the plant with a whole bunch of other people, and they open the doors of this plant where they're going to be huge numbers. I mean, we're talking about tens of thousands, about 12,000 workers in this plant. A blast of air, hot air, blasts them. It's ferociously hot, more than 100 degrees, saturated with acetone. So they had to work in this mill. I mean, it's the plant where they had the doors closed and breathing these acetone fumes. And George describes their battles against it's just life-threatening. George himself ended up with brown lung. He suffered from it his whole life from working in that mill. He organized them. These 10,000 workers he organized. At the time that he organized them into the textile workers, it was the biggest union local in the the nation.
And what year was that he organized?
It was the textile workers union.
When?
Yeah.
What
And
year?
he was just a wonderful organizer. He was a great, big, strong, tall man, and very, you'd say if you looked at him, you'd say, "Wow, this guy's tough," but he was so gentle and kind. He was just a wonderful human being, and he just organized these workers to fight for a living, just literally fighting for their lives and fighting for a living wage. And he led them, and he was so good at it that ultimately he was elected as the president of the CIO, Congress of Industrial Organizations, and so he was the president of the CIO, and he worked closely with John L. Lewis. He actually went to meetings at John L. Lewis's office in Washington, D.C. And they became very close friends. John L. Lewis had, I guess, Irish in his background too, and John L. Lewis told him, George, you should run for vice president of the CIO. And of course, John L. Lewis was not only the head of the United Mine Workers, he was also the head of the CIO. And but George didn't do that, but he was elected president. And so he was in the thick of all. He told me so many stories about the fights they led for racial equality, to integrate the workforce in Baltimore and all through the state of Maryland. They met with Herbert O'Connor, then the governor of Maryland. He and a team from the CIO and also the AFL was there. And they met with O'Connor, and the war was looming, the Second World War. And George told O'Connor, he said, we cannot afford racial discrimination. We cannot afford a segregated workforce because a war is coming, and people are going to be drafted. The young men are going to be drafted into the army, and you're going to be short of labor. So they said, you have to integrate the workforce in Maryland. And O'Connor said, okay, we'll do it. And they pushed through a law or regulations that all the big plants, Glen L. Martin and Bethlehem Steel, all the big mills had to integrate. And you know what the main workforce? I saw photographs of the shipyard workers building Liberty ships down there in the inner harbor of Baltimore. You know who the workers were? Black women. Because most of the men, including black men, were being drafted. So there's a picture of Rosie the Riveter with her hard hat on, a black woman riveting the panels on a ship. Just wonderful. So at a certain point, in the midst of this, George got to know communists who were also in the workforce, and like Patty Whalen. Patty Whalen was a main organizer of the National Maritime Union. He was a wonderful human being, very feisty and fiery, and Patty said, "Why don't you join the Communist Party?" And George ended up joining the Communist Party. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it was, and so he was. Then came the war, and George stepped down as the chairman of the CP. I mean, as head of the CIO, and joined the Army Air Corps. And he was a loyal soldier through all the war to fight fascism. They were diehard anti-fascists. That's what George was. Mm-hmm. And so the end of the war came, and George went back to working at the same mill at the Celanese plant, and then came the witch hunt. He was hauled before the committees. And not only George, but Dorothy Rose Bloomberg. A chapter in my book is Dorothy Rose Bloomberg, this wonderful woman. She was a very beautiful Jewish woman, fiery, full of fight, and they hauled her before the witch hunt committee and put her in prison. Oh, George was down at the St. Petersburg at the prison down in Virginia, and Dorothy Rose was imprisoned out in Alderson, out in West Virginia, and such a history. And they were just, what they were asked. What did they want them to do? What were these witch hunt characters asking? Name names. That's the main thing they wanted them, was to name names so they could haul in other people to interrogate. And George always told me, he said, were we the target? Was the Communist Party the target? Yes, we were the target. But the main target was the CIO. That's what they were really out to crush. They were out to destroy the CIO. Why? Because it was a militant, fighting, union force representing, mine, mill, and smelter workers, and the steel workers and miners and garment workers. All these workers that were represented by CIO unions, and they wanted to crush it. You know what? One of the main issues that the CIO was working towards: national health care.
Yeah.
Universal health care for everyone. And you know who was standing in their way? The American Medical Association. And these witch hunters in the U.S. Congress were just agents. And some of the people that were coming after George later were tried and convicted themselves on corruption charges.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's an incredible story, and in the discussions we've had about the decline of the union movement, the Red Scare and the driving out of people like that is a major part. Just to finish up here, how did you start writing this book? Did George keep an autobiography? Is that how you describe it?
George was still alive when he said, I think I ought to write up some of these things, of my memories. And I said, oh, yes, George, we will help you. And my wife, Joyce, did all the typing. She did all the note taking. She did all the editing. Joyce Provo Wheeler, a school teacher in Baltimore. And she was helping and I was helping. And we accumulated papers, and also out at Frostburg, David Gillespie, the director of the library, he had founded the George A. Meyers collection at Frostburg. And so he was helping. We were working all together. And finally, at one point, David Gillespie sent me a box of papers that he had downloaded, or he and his staff had downloaded from George's papers, all stored at the Frostburg Library. And my God, these are newspaper articles about George. These are speeches George gave. All of these in a box. So then Joyce and I decided to move west. And okay, I shipped the box out here along with everything else, and it went in my closet right over there. Yeah. So I'm 86 years old, so I decide, well, Tim, it's time for you to get your affairs in order. So I pulled things out from my closet, and here came this box of all these papers of George A. Meyers, including reminiscences of George and his own. Joyce had typed it, but it's all in his own words, George's writings. And so that's how I started writing the book. And I hope all of you get a copy of the book and read it, because I can tell you, not because of me, but because he is such a wonderful human being. George Meyers, it's an outstanding book. And it tells you so much about, right now we're fighting fascism, right? We're fighting the danger of fascism. George was anti-fascist, heart and soul. He always told me, he said, um, the key to the success of the CIO was the unity of left and center.
Okay.
The left and the center got together and worked, and the even the right wing began to come along with us because we were so powerful. And what was the strategy of the enemy who was trying to destroy us, starting with the National Association of Manufacturers, to split that unity of left and right? And that was what they did. They broke apart the center forces. They targeted the left, put them in jail, and said, "Oh, they're communists. They're agents of a foreign power. You better not have anything to do with them." And all these center forces, many of them uh, in fear, ran and hid, and and the labor movement came apart. I always say, though, there are plenty of center forces who did not. I met many of them out in Lonaconing and Cumberland, brave people, both left and center, who wouldn't budge and kept on fighting. And that's what we're doing right now, is building a movement. That's the comeback of the labor movement, is to rebuild the unity of left and center forces, the unity of the workers. And that's the way we're going to defeat fascism, and that's the way we're going to organize the unorganized.
Okay. All right. I want to thank Tim. We're going to have a notice on this webpage of where you can get the book, No Power Greater. But thank you very much. I hate to cut this off, but we're done here. All
Thank
right.
you, Bill. It's a
Okay.
pleasure talking with you,
All
and
right.
thank you for all you do.
All right.